Actually, Angel, it's actually PI Day. I wish it was the PIE Day. Give me an excuse. All right. All right. So again, we just got through physical development. I ended with the ACEs because it does, again, it goes back to the interaction between our emotional, social experiences, our cognitive experiences, and how it impacts actual physical outcomes for individuals, such in this case, the genetics and the like. So that was a good kind of transition now to get into our conversations on cognition. So, um, just as a review, when we're dealing with the Piaget model, which does have some important aspects to consider, is we're entering in what's called the pre-operational phase. So we just got through talking about sensory motor experiences where the child begins to interact with their environment. And now we're going to go into this symbolization of the world. Okay. Um, so again, when we get to this, according to Piaget, it's when we start to develop what he called object permanence. And but what I'd rather you think about this is this is where children go from communicating purely just on the emotions of communication, and they're starting to give things words through language. And so they're starting to represent the world around them by using the way humans communicate, which is language. Okay. So in this pre-operational phase, there's some features of it that we should discuss. Just a second. Okay. So the reason it's called pre-operational is because of the idea of lacking operation. Mental act, meaning that mental action follows some type of systematic rule. Um, so for example, but what it does include is, for example, the use of symbols, intuitive thought, meaning going off of how one feels is how you interpret the world. And then we have what's called transductive reasoning. And what transductive reasoning is it's a failure of understanding cause and effect relationships, which happen when a child reasons for specific to specific. So drawing on relationships between two separate events that are otherwise unrelated. So in transductive reasoning, a child may say that, what's a good example? Um, that the relation between mom and dad, that, okay, so experience with dad and experience with mom um, are transduced with each other. So they become one in the same, meaning that the child doesn't separate between mom and dad. Okay, that's kind of the idea behind it. We also see egocentrism. And again, just to go back to this, if the world is coming at you with all of these symbols and ideas, and it seems like it's there for you, then you come to the assumption that the world exists for your purpose, for your reasoning. Okay. And then animism is it kind of goes two ways. One, it gives your teddy bear a life. So your teddy bear is able to act human, act in the real world. But it's also this idea that you can transpose, for example, animals onto people. So, for example, mom might become the elephant in the room and they understand that. And then in this phase, we also lack of conservation. So, for example, the example is those two clay balls that equal size and one is squished, and then a child in this age range will say that there's now more or less of one of the clay balls compared to before. Okay. That the one squish changed size. Okay. But again, the big area of this area of development in cognitively is the use of symbols, and that's representing things that are not immediately in front of them. And so in this section of development, we can see a lot of fantasy play where the child can imagine them being Superman or Wonder Woman or a firefighter or playing house and being a mother or a father, which we will find it is a very, very important type of developmental play. As we will see, this is when children start playing out or fantasizing about the different roles and places they can be. And we'll see that a lot of identity of the child is developed during this period. But we also find that the more fantasy play that a child in this age group has, the better off they are, for example, cognitive and problem solving and those types of things. We also see in this age group what's called symbolic drawing. So, the best example of this is like a pink stick figure might represent mom, where an orange stick figure might represent dad. Okay. And so they come up with symbols to represent different aspects of their life. Okay. This is also where, if you look in the helping fields, you hear the words art therapy. And so, or interpreting a child's life through the art that they draw. Because what we do find is children do symbolize their world in different ways through art. And if they can't express it through words, we know that they can express it symbolically through drawings and coloring and those types of symbolic type of representation. Okay. Intuitive thought, this is the why stage. This is where, little kids that are constantly asking why. And it's important to understand that when a child is doing this is actually very healthy for their development. I know sometimes as parents and caregivers, it can be very frustrating. But remember, this is where a child has a very unmyelinated brain, meaning that the learning that they're capable of doing is very good, but the brain isn't as fast as it is as an adult. And so the constant asking of why is that those neural connections are being tightened and strengthened through this process. Okay. And so transductive thinking is the idea that a child is more influenced by what they perceive and creating their own explanation for what they see. Okay. All right. And just as an example of egocentrism, so this is, remember this three mountain task. And as we said, later on, it'll be being able to take on the perspective of others. But if you remember right, in this age group, the child, when this child is asked what the teddy bear sees, the child perceives its egocentric perspective. So it'll repeat what the child just said they see. So this is kind of representation of egocentrism, but it also represents when a child is actually able to mentally manipulate their surroundings as they transition into the operational phase, concrete operational phase. And then again, this is the idea of conservation. So a child within this age group, they look at these and they'll say, yes, they're the same. And a child in this age will, then you change the size and they'll say that this one's either bigger or smaller than it was originally, not understanding that it's still the same mass. Okay. And this goes back to that transductive type of reasoning that they're having. They're just using their current experience to determine this outcome, whereas they don't use what they just saw to determine their current experience. And this is a good example of animism. Okay, so I want you to imagine, I wish I could make this do it, that we put a child in front of a screen, and these are all rotating in a circle. Okay, so they're all rotating around each other, and we ask children what they see, and most children will actually create a story behind what they're saying. They'll say something like the triangle is or the triangle is bullying the circle that it's following, and this circle is trying to catch up with the triangle to tell them to stop doing that, or the triangle is a fox chasing the bunny rabbit, but funnily the bunny rabbit is chasing this bunny rabbit is chasing the fox, and they'll create some type of story, and they'll animate the triangle, the circle, and give them life or give them a personality of some type. Now, interestingly, and this goes to and we'll talk about children's disorders, so we'll get into autism before we leave early childhood. The interesting difference between children who do not exhibit the symptoms of autism and children who do exhibit the symptoms of autism is children with autism will actually represent exactly what they see. They'll say, well, there's two circles and there's a triangle, and they're all going in a circular motion clockwise. And the triangle is partly between the circle and the other circle, meaning what autistic children will represent exactly what they see. They won't animate it. They won't give the circles and triangles personality. Okay. Now, I'm going to leave this explanation as a cliffhanger because I want to get into the symptomology of autism, because once we do that, we'll understand why autistic children represent these as exactly what we do, because autism is what's called a social disorder. A lot of people think that children with autism have a cognitive deficit or something like that. But autism primarily is a social disorder, not a cognitive disorder. Okay. But we'll get more into that. I just wanted to bring this up at this point. But the main point of this is that for the majority of children, they will give each of these shapes a personalities. In some of the cases, it's kind of fun to watch. If you get a video, go on YouTube. Some of them will even give the triangle and circles names. Or even in my example, they made them into different animals, those kinds of things. So this is an example of not only meaning making, but it goes back to that animism that is prevalent for young children. Okay. So we didn't talk much about Vygotsky's theory when we were introducing three theories that represent each of the domains of development. But Vygotsky, instead of like Piaget, who they both have theories of cognitive development, but Piaget's theory represents a theory of cognitive development that is not based on the child's social world. And Vygotsky actually came up with a theory that determines cognitive development based on the child's social experiences, meaning that it's kind of like Erikson's theory for socio-emotional development. Is what Vygotsky argued is that children's cognitive development is based on their interactions with their social world. Okay. And he came up with what's known as zone of proximity. And I think it's not listed right here. Zone of proximal development. And that is represented, if we want to think about, let me bring up a little example. let's say this X represents the child, okay? And the distance between the child's independence and ability, what they can do with help, okay? So in the beginning, the support system is very close to the child, okay? But the point of the support system and what he's considered healthy development is that these support systems should start getting further and further away from the child until the child has what we call independence, meaning that they're able to reason and think without assistance of an adult or a support system of some type. Okay. And this is the notion of what we call scaffolding. Okay, that you start with, for example, with a child's, if you go into early childhood education, you'll use this notion of scaffolding, that you'll start with the basic. Um, what's a good example? Let's say, well, a good example is just drawing a stick figure. Okay. So you may start with a circle that represents the face. Okay. And then the next part is then to draw the body and then the arms and the legs. I know that's a very basic example, but you start with the very basics and then you build upon that. Another good example is teaching a child how to read. First, you start with the words and the meanings of those words, and then you put those words together into a noun verb relationship. And then you may add on different descriptors of the noun and the verb to create a complex sentence. Okay. This is the idea of scaffolding. Okay. Um, Now, and again, if you go into the early childhood field or the elementary education field, you'll kind of use this idea of scaffolding in the education field. But even as parents, we should understand that you give a child a problem and you get upset because they can't solve it. So, one that I often saw when I was doing parenting class is they're frustrated that their 5-year-old or 4-year-old, when they say, go clean your room, the child is like, they find their child in the room just kind of playing with their toys or just kind of, quote unquote, messing around. And a lot of the parents that I worked with got very frustrated. But the issue is that that parent knows how to clean a room. And their assumption is that the child, because they know, should know. Or because they've cleaned a room in front of the child, that child, just by observing the parent, should be able to clean their room. Okay. And that's a very common mistake that we do as adults. We put our adult mind into the child and assume that they have the capabilities that we have. Okay. And so the idea of scaffolding is you start with working with the child, picking up their toys and putting them away. Okay. That's stage one. So they've done that. They completed that task. And then maybe in the next week, after they're independently picking up the toy and putting away, then maybe you start with straightening the bed as an example, picking up clothes as an example. And the behaviors get more and more complex to where it comes to your adult expectation for a child to clean their room. And that's the idea of scaffolding when it comes to early childhood. Okay. So, Kelston, your question. So, people with autism are aware of things compared to people who don't have autism. What I would say to that is children with autism see the world objectively, more objectively, and less subjectively, meaning objectively, meaning that's a triangle, right? Where those are circles. and they're moving in a motion. Okay. Whereas in versus subjective is your personal experience with those triangles and circles moving. So, for example, children with autism are harder to express their experience, but they can give an objective description of their experience, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. So I think we'll let me look what we have going on. Okay, yeah, we'll end with this because I want to spend a complete class talking about vocabulary and language. So I want to end with this idea of play and again bringing home the point that it's a very important type of play. And there's four types of play that are really important for children to engage in. And again, if you're going into early childhood education and you're building your classroom, throughout the day, you'll use all four of these types of play because they're all important. Okay. And so I'm going to use kind of the classroom as an example. Okay. So on this continuum, we have the child as the active participant versus on the other end of the continuum, the child is more passive. Okay. And then on the other axis, we have the teacher as the active participant versus the teacher as a passive um, 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 participant. Okay. And so when the child is active and the teacher is passive, this is what we call discovery or free play. Okay. And so again, what does this look like in a childcare or the preschool is there's set times during the day where a child can freely explore the different stations in the childcare. So they could go to, the block building area, the book area, um, let's see, the little science areas that I've seen, and they can freely explore those different areas. Now, what happens during this period is not only is a child finding their interest, right? They're discovering what they are interested in. It also provides the ability to learn what interaction with other children have. So during this period, a lot of kind of conflicts between I want to play with the truck, but Billy's playing with the truck, and how do they negotiate that type of play. Okay. And so there's two things that are going on here. The child is figuring out what their preferences are, what they like to do, and their interests, basically their identity. But also, it's an opportunity for them to socialize and start resolving conflict. Okay. Um, when the child is active and the teacher is active, this is what we call that scaffolding or guided play. Okay. So this is when the children, are doing some type of art project. Okay. Um, and so maybe they're using clay and the teacher is teaching them how to make the clay and then how you can mold the clay into different things. It can be, a good example here in the southern Arizona is how to make a tortilla, right? And so first you get the ingredients, you put the ingredients together, and then you knead it, knead it, knead it, and then you use one of those flattening machines. And so it goes through that process, okay? And both the teacher and the child are actively engaged in this creation of, for example, the tortilla, okay? And then again, in the childcare setting, you have what's called maturation rest. Okay, this is when the child is passive and the teacher is passive. This is, for example, nap time, quiet time, those types of the notions that it's important to have kind of that rest period in order for the child to understand that it's important to be active, but there's also times where we have to rest and take it easy kind of thing, okay? When the child is passive and the teacher is active, this is called direct instruction, rule-based games, okay? In kind of, if we want to think about it this way, this is kind of what we're doing right here, right? You're passively listening to this lecture, even though you might be engaged in it and learning something and everything, you're kind of the passive recipient, where I'm the one here doing the activity of lecturing. Okay. That's an example in at our age group. But when we're talking about early childhood, this is where they're learning what's called rule-based games, that certain activities have rules of engagement. Okay. And the goal is if you remember during this period, children lack the ability to see rules within a situation. And so what this is it's really practicing that A sometimes need to come before B, and that may result in C. And so it's learning those rule-based games. This the maybe the best example of this is when teaching a child how to write. That there's rules that you follow in order to get, your name. You put your first name first and your last name second, kind of idea. Okay. And so all of these, and I want to drive this point home. The more a child engages in play in this age group, the healthier they are cognitively and emotionally as they go through later childhood into adolescence and even into young adulthood. Okay. So this is a very important aspect of a child's development, especially during this group. And that's why if you look at, for example, Arizona, what is it called? First Things First is the state organization that sets up standards for quality childcares in the state, and their standards are very much based on, does the early childhood center provide these opportunities? Or is your child just going to a childcare and sitting in front of a TV all day? Okay. Or is just being controlled by the adult and being stored there until you get there as the parent. And again, I would encourage any parent in the room that when you're going and seeking a childcare, ask and make sure that your child is engaging in all four of these types of play during their time there. But also, if you're a stay-at-home parent, or not even stay-at-home parent, but even just as a parent in your home, you should be providing these different types of play. Okay. All right, I'm going to